In this question, we need to input a number. Again, we're going to get the number from the first edit box, EDT num1. And we are going to determine if that number is a perfect square or not. So what is a perfect square? If we look at 36, 36 is a perfect square. Why is it a perfect square? Because when I find the square root of that is 6.0. If I had to write it as a real, so it's 6.0. Now, if I look at another number like 37, that's not a perfect square. Why is that not a perfect square? Because if I find the square root, that is 6 point, and I'm taking a guess here, but it's 1 or 0, 1 or something like that. The point is that the decimal part is not 0. It's not like it was with 36. It's got a value higher than 0. Similarly, if I had to take a number like 16, right, the square root of 16 is 4.0, and the square root of 17 will be 4. And there is some remainder, and I'm just assuming there's a it's greater than 0. That remainder is greater than 0 again, and I'm putting a 1 in there. So if you look at the pattern is that for those perfect squares, that's a perfect square, and that's a perfect square. What do we notice? That the fractional part, this here, the part after the number, the fractional part is 0. Even here as well, the fractional part is 0. So let's try and see how we can go about solving this question. So here we're going to go num1, num is string to int edt num1.text. So I've got the number from my first edit box, num1.text. And this variable will be declared of type integer. So when I declare this variable, I'm declaring it of type integer. Now I want to, if you look at how we looked at solving this question, it required you using the square root. So there is a predefined function called square root, sqrt, and I'm now going to work out the square root. So I'll call it sq root, my variable, and I'm going to make use of sqrt. That's the function square root. It's not case sensitive, even though I wrote it in capital letters. Sqrt of num. Now, when you're finding the square root, this variable must always be declared of type real. So in my variable section, I'll have that of real, and this obviously is an integer. Now that I've got the square root, it means I've got the number in this format. I need to know, how can I look at the fractional part? And if you know your functions well, there is a function called frac. And this function will allow me to look at that fractional part. So I'm simply going to make a check if frac of the square root that I just worked out, sq root, if the frac of that variable is greater than 0. Right? If it's greater than 0, or maybe I should have said if it's equal to 0, maybe let's do that. If the fractional part of the square root is equal to 0, then what does that mean? It means there. that's the case. It's equal to 0. Therefore, it is a perfect square. So read out dot lines dot add perfect square. End. And then I'm going to go else begin read out dot lines dot add, and I'm going to say not. I'm just going to abbreviate PS perfect square. Please don't do that. And I'm going to go end. So there's my begin and end, begin and end. So what we are saying is that you're going to find the square root and you're going to check the fractional part. Check the fractional part. If that fractional part equals to 0, then that has to be a perfect square. But if it's greater than 0 or it's not equal to 0, so that fractional part could even be, so you could have in square root of 37, for example, you could have 6.001, whatever, as an example. I'm not saying that that is the answer, but this is not equal to 0. And because it's not equal to 0, it means that condition will fail and it will come and say it's not a perfect square. So this is how you would solve this problem. There are other ways in which you could solve it, but this is just one particular solution. Did anyone solve it in any other way?
Yes, sir.
Tell me how you did it, Talon.
So I use truncate instead of frac.
Okay.
Yeah, same way.
Okay, give me, so you found square root, right?
I said root is equal to square root number.
Yeah.
If truncate root is equal to root, then perfect square.
Right. Now, guys, just watch this, right? So here, you're finding the square root. Right? Now, remember, the square root of 36 is 6.0. And 6.0 is the same as 6. So in other words, if I drop the remainder part, then the numbers are still the same. Okay? But if I have the square root of 37, now with square root of 37, let's assume it's 6.1. If I truncate 6.1, I get 6. You'll notice that these two numbers are not the same. It's only equal. It's only equal when you have a perfect square, because that is a 0.0. It's a 0.0, and 6.0 is the same as 6. So that's the other way in which you can solve the problem. Many ways of doing it. But now that if you didn't know about frac, I think it's a nice function that you can make use of.